Hi, my name's Nolan, and our Historical Lens project covers the topic of war. Our goal for our presentation is to analyze various sources of oppression due to war from both the past and the present. We aim to explain how those who are oppressed are being oppressed, compare examples of oppression from the past to the present, and how the past impacts oppression that happens today. Before we dig deeper into how war affects oppression, I feel explaining what oppression really is necessary to understand the material. So oppression is the unjust or cruel expression of power or authority. Also, oppression can mean the condition of feeling weighed down or the act of pressing down. In a social sense, oppression can be an intense concept that can be quite difficult to overcome. Oppression is also described with words such as dehumanization and exploitation, just to show how demoralizing the concept of oppressing a certain group of people really is. By seeing how horrible this sounds, people may ask, why does oppression happen? Oppression happens due to a government or political organization implementing restrictions that degrade a social group. This degradation applies to racial, economic, cultural, and many other different kinds of social groups. It's sad to see that even today there is a sense that certain social groups are considered more dominant than others, and that gives reason to why other social groups can be oppressed. Looking into how war affects oppression, the biggest reason oppression happens is fear. Governments get scared of certain social groups potentially being a threat to their society, and punishing them with oppression is thought to be the best way to be safe. Looking in the past, we can analyze so many different instances of oppression. For example, the Jim Crow laws denied equality for colored people in America. The land of equal opportunity wasn't that equal due to the fact that people were being denied opportunities because of the color of their skin. Under Adolf Hitler's dictatorship rule, an entire society was being oppressed as anyone who didn't follow the policies implemented by Hitler were to be killed. The citizens of Germany could not express their own opinions or say a disagreement because they feared of being executed. Lastly, in certain countries, a certain religion may be seen as the primary religion of that country, and whoever practiced any other religion other than that set religion, they would be jailed for expressing their practices. Throughout this presentation, we will see various examples of how specifically war leads to oppression.
Hi, I'm Justin, and I'll be discussing the importance of the Remembering Manzanar documentary. To start, some of the key points are that Manzanar was a Japanese internment camp. Back in World War II, Japan had joined Germany's Nazi regime as a member of the Axis powers, and in their conquest of mainland Asia, Japan knew that it could no longer receive support from the United States, so as a result, they surprised the nation with an attack on Pearl Harbor, bringing the United States in the war. This prompted America's government to distrust any and all citizens of the United States who were of Japanese descent, forcefully relocating them from their homes to the internment camps where they were stripped of their freedom and kept locked up under surveillance. They were forced to leave everything behind, including their homes, possessions, and even their pets. Once the war had ended and the imprisoned Japanese were allowed to go free, they found that everything they left behind had been taken from them, including jobs and means of supporting their families. The US government did not even provide compensation until several years later. This is a clear example of oppression because it shows blatant discrimination against those of Japanese descent, believing that any of them could be spies for Japan, even though many of those people were US citizens who considered themselves American and had never even went to Japan. Yet they were imprisoned all the same and had their loyalties questioned. The US government showed that it did not care if it was imprisoning and taking away the rights of US citizens, and instead only believed that any and all people of Japanese descent were potential enemies of the state. A soldier in the US military was a man of Japanese descent himself, despite him risking his life fighting for America and receiving the highest honor for sacrificing himself to protect his allies from a hand grenade. His mother was still detained in an internment camp, as if her son's patriotism and bravery meant nothing.
Hi, my name is Shane, and I'll be discussing the Soldiers podcast from Uncivil. So back in the Civil War, to reenactments of a Civil War today, there's always a stigma amongst men that women didn't really do anything during the Civil War, which is to the contrary, where women actually contributed a lot to the Civil War. They were nurses. Many traveled with their husbands or brothers. Some even fought in the Civil War dressed up as men. And war reenactor, Civil War reenactor Lauren Cook, who goes by Larry Cook, when she does reenactments, she had a lot of trouble, going through reenactments because she had to go to the bathroom and dress up and be a man. And one day she was eventually caught and she was banned from ever doing reenactments again. Eventually, she sued the National Park Services and she won that case. But during the process of finding evidence for letting her do the war reenactment, she uncovered a vast amount of women that fought in the Civil War. One prominent one was Rosetta Wakeman, where she had letters describing her tales during the Civil War before her untimely death in Louisiana. And another woman, Albert Cashier, she also fought in the Civil War and had been a man for until 1911. She was even able to vote during that time. But after a carriage accident in 1911, she had to go back as a woman. And Sarah Edmonds, she fought also, and after the war, she raised her kids and had a family, and even received a military pension in 1884. So, how does this podcast show oppression for war? This podcast shows oppression for war because it affects women so much, and women back then, and even to some extent to this day, have to hide their sexuality or femininity in order to fight in in the army or the armed forces. And an interesting statistic: in 2017, in the United States Army, 70% of respondents stated that they received adequate training in warrior type tasks and basic training or officer basic. Yet 70% of respondents also stated that they could have used additional training. Discouragingly, 53% responded no when asked if their chain of command would support them in additional training if they needed more training. So that kind of goes to show how, even to this day, we still have a long way to go to, you know, fight oppression for females that are fighting in today's wars. And I hope this slide can help the resistance to oppression for females and to give them more recognition for their service and everything they've done from the Civil War to the modern times.
Even though it's been 20 years since 9/11, there's still some racism stemming from that day that exists today. A poll from the Associated Press Center of Public Affairs Research found that 50% of people still have unfavorable views to Muslim people because of 9/11. The oppression that Muslim people have been going through has gotten better since the days of 9/11, where people would get harassed constantly 24/7. Ishaq Patan, a 26-year-old man, recalls a time when he was a boy where people would ask if he would blow up their school and ask him questions about where Osama bin Laden is and other questions that as a child he had no idea about. He also talks about being targeted and taken aside at airports because of his ethnicity. In a 2017 Pew Research Center of U.S. Muslims, nearly half of the respondents say that they've experienced at least one instance of religious discrimination within the year before. Although they did say that they also felt like they were supported by other people as well, which points to the fact that it has gotten better. But there's still research. There's still much racism going on. Harassment like this makes Muslims feel alienated and feel like they don't belong. But the good thing is, the Muslim people are not just sitting there. they're fighting back against this oppression. And Shuruki Ola, a Muslim woman running for King County Council District, has been trying to get political representation, as political representation is one of the most direct ways to stop the oppression of her people. So that's something that she's been doing. And other Muslims are speaking out in schools, speaking out to people in their daily lives, just walking around. There's a Muslim Marine that goes by the name of there's a Muslim Marine that goes by the name of Mansour Shams, and he travels across the U.S. with a sign that reads, "I'm a Muslim and the U.S. Marine. Ask me anything." He's also supports the organization MuslimMarine.org, where Muslims who have been oppressed try to let people know the truth about who they are and what they stand for, and that just because they're Muslim doesn't mean that they are enemies of the United States. This is one of the many ways that Muslims are fighting back against oppressors oppression and oppressors that they've been putting up with, especially since 9/11. Another example of people standing up to the oppression is a girl who, at her school, after 9/11, wore a head covering that was actually red, white, and blue. She did this to speak out against the bullying and the harassment that she received after the events on 9/11. And now people are continuing to talk about what happened at 9/11. Amri Ahmed speaks about honoring the lives of those who died in America at 9/11, but also highlights the Iraqis who died in the wars that were launched soon after. By doing this, they're not only highlighting the things that Americans have gone through, but the sufferings of the Muslim people as well. And through all of these ways, they're bringing light to the oppression that Muslims have gone through, and just spreading awareness, which is one of the best ways to stop oppression from continuing. So right here is a graph of anti-Muslim assaults reported every year. There's definitely a clear increase in the year 2001, but as you can see, it hasn't gotten better since. It's slowly been overall increasing, and it showcases the increased discrimination that they've been facing since 2001.
So for my next article, I'll be talking about Beverly Tatum article. And in this article, it talks about different levels of oppression that are everywhere today in different ethnic groups, ranging from Latinx to Natives to Asians and to the Middle East. And one story I found from the Tatum article was one girl felt very fractured from her Muslim identity, specifically her religion, because when she was a teenager riding a school bus, this was in the early 2000s, and when she was a new kid and kids asked her what her religion was, she said something Mediterranean, when in actuality she was Muslim. And reason why she didn't really share that much was she felt almost ashamed of her religion because of what happened a couple of years before 9/11. So that's one of the examples that Beverly Tatum shows about the levels of repression. Another one tidbit I found was the Alaskan teenagers are 8 times more likely to commit suicide than the average teenager in the United States. I've never seen that statistic before from any health class I've taken about regarding depression or suicide. So I found that kind of shocking to see how for Alaskan natives that was much higher than the normal teenager in the United States. And as I was reading a little bit more about the article regarding that story, it showed that a lot of Alaskan natives they don't feel like they fit into U.S. culture or they feel just as oppressed as any other minority group, which affects them and their mental health. And one final tidbit I found was a lecture Mitsuya Yamada where she taught an Asian segment of an American ethnics literature course, and she opened up on how many of her students were surprised that Asians had so much built up anger from all the racism and oppression they faced in the past in the United States. And she talked about how her students in that class felt very appalled to hear all those stories she was sharing about regarding subjects like the Chinese back in the late 1800s when they were migrating to China, and during the gold rush and how they were affected and oppressed, and the internment camps in Manzanar in Japan for Japanese immigrants in western United States, and how they were affected. I felt like that really connected well with Justin's story and the Muslim American story going back. That connects to Danny's story of how many Muslim Americans to this day still feel the effects of what happened after 9/11. So I felt like this Beverly Tatum article really, really is a big mixing pot, and encapsulates everything together for the effects upon war on oppression.
After analyzing the resources and using further research, we can analyze more on how each story resisted to oppression. And looking at the Manzanar video, with everyone in these camps, tensions began to rise for various different reasons, including wage differences, food shortages, intergenerational friction, and with all this tension, riots and protests began to begin. And to prevent these riots, the authorities that were running these camps began to defend themselves and trying to fight back. And so multiple people were shot and killed. And so the Supreme Court made a ruling called Ex parte Mitsuye Endo, and this was where the justices ruled that the U.S. government could not continue to detain citizens, and so that ended and closed down these camps. Looking at the Uncivil podcast, during the interview, Lauren Cook essentially had to go against the United States park system to be allowed to go and participate in war reenactments. She won the legal battle. However, the court of public opinion had her thoughts with men still being opposed to women participating. Even to this day, she and other female reenactors have challenged the stigma of women not participating by ignoring the backlash and still going in and participating with those war reenactments. Looking at the 9/11 article having to do with Muslim Americans, the article describes that there was a picture of a license plate that said, "Just ask a Muslim U.S. Marine" at muslimmarine.org. And this was a way that Muslims who were being oppressed were allowed to go talk to someone that was in the Marines and being able to kind of talk about their problems and how they're being oppressed, and they could be connected to that Marine because he had also experienced the things that they're going through. And it was a way for them to fight against the oppressions that have been put upon them, from 9/11 to the present. Another example from the 9/11 article was a Muslim woman running for King County Council district was gaining political representation, and this was one of the most direct ways to trying to stop oppression against people by being able to make new rules to stop this oppression. And lastly, in the Beverly Tatum article, Tatum puts a quote on how to discuss resistance by saying, "If you don't know how best to be helpful, ask and then listen. Use your own privilege to question policies that are discriminatory." And also, President Obama created the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the DACA program, to allow more than 750,000 unauthorized immigrants who arrived in the U.S. before the age of 16 to go to school or get a work permit, as well as receive a 2-year period of protection from deportation.
Now, there were many similarities and differences between the three stories. To start, all three showed a prominent disregard for the American identity of the groups that were targeted. The Japanese and Muslim populations in the United States both faced heavy discrimination and dehumanization purely on the basis of their ancestry. The Japanese were oppressed by the government, who took everything from them, including their freedom, and entirely ignored their American citizenship and loyalty to imprison them as enemies or potential spies. The Muslim population, on the other hand, faces a slightly different oppression based on relating them to terrorist organizations following 9/11, continuing to disregard their American citizenship and loyalties. Unlike the two of these cases, where the oppression was based more on race or ethnicity, the Civil War reenactment case focused on sex, preventing women to participate in Civil War reenactments despite the accuracy of women having participated in the Civil War. Here, women were forbidden from joining in on Civil War reenactments solely based on their sex. While this may not be the exact same issue as the other cases, there is a very clear underlying theme between them that these women, just like the Japanese and Muslim populations, were facing oppression in the sense of having their American citizenship discredited, with the only factor taken into account being something that has nothing to do with the person's patriotism, values, or conduct. Groups across all three cases were generalized and stereotyped, being viewed as these subgroups rather than fellow Americans. In the case of Manzanar and 9/11, groups were oppressed out of fear from the people and the government, were so distrustful of the ethnicities behind tragic events that they ended up dehumanizing and punishing individuals who had nothing to do with them. In the case of the Civil War reenactments, women were not allowed to join out of a belief that it would be historically inaccurate, even though that contradicts true historical accuracy, where several women dressed up as men to join the army and help fight for their country. In terms of resistance, it varies between cases. The imprisoned Japanese descendants were given no opportunity to resist at all against government oppression, but the women of the reenactments were allowed to take legal action, pushing court cases in an attempt to claim the right to reenact regardless of sex. And as for the Muslim populations following 9/11, they were able to take action by promoting the Muslims serving in the American military, as well as trying to get more Muslim political representation.
So, when trying to connect our topic to modern events, I think the most obvious choice that comes into mind is the war happening in Ukraine right now by Putin. And I think the obvious way to connect this is that people of Russian descent around the world who have no connection to this war are being blamed purely because of their ethnicity. They're being used as a focal point by people who are looking to place their fear and anger somewhere, and they see someone who's similar to the people who are attacking Ukraine, and they think, oh, this person must be part of this. And so these people who have nothing to do with what is happening are being oppressed and harassed by people around the world. And this leads to their basic rights being violated. They're being denied basic rights at work. It's much harder for them to find work now because companies don't want to hire them because of their ethnicity, which is a clear violation of the law. They're being harassed by people because of their ethnicity. They're being blamed for something they have, again, no connection to. And they're being asked, why is Putin doing this, when clearly they have no other better understanding than someone else does, and just because of their ethnicity, it doesn't give them a connection to this. And so now it's much harder for Russians to get jobs, and they're being discriminated against. So, to continue this thought, let's look at specific examples that have been shown in this article that show how Russian American workers are being harassed. And this particular article focuses on America and what is happening inside of businesses. So, a Russian American in a sales company was denied clients, and to quote, his manager said, "Let's avoid any unnecessary negative vibes with potential clients, at least until this whole Ukraine thing blows over." So that shows clear discrimination against someone because of their ethnicity, and it's denying them opportunity to make more money and to, work. And another clear example of this is someone just saying, keep your head down and try to lessen that obvious Russian accent a bit for the next few months, particularly around top management. What this shows is that managers are trying to keep people of Russian descent from talking as much and from displaying who they are, to try to change the way that they talk. And this again shows a violation of basic human rights, and shows how people of Russian descent are being affected by this war in Ukraine, and how people are again using them as a focal point to vent their anger and fear. Another example of this is at an accounting firm. Someone said, "Please explain Putin's motives for invading Ukraine." And this is very similar to what the post 9/11 article said about how Muslims were being asked, please explain why this happened, please explain the motives for what just happened. And these people should not be asked this. This is just making them feel ostracized and harassed, and trying to make them feel guilty for something that they should not. And in general, managers are ignoring harassment towards people of Russian descent. People in the workplace are taunting them or ridiculing them about what is happening, and managers aren't taking action, maybe because they don't know what to do. And there have been more employees arguing with each other over the invasion of Ukraine, and people of Russian descent are just being ostracized here and disengaged in these conversations. Now that we've covered all of this, we can connect the past events and how they impact today. And as we saw in the last slide, history is still repeating itself over and over again, despite previous acknowledgement of the past. We can see what happened in World War II with the Japanese internment camps, the discrimination towards Muslim people post 9/11, and now the discrimination against people of Russian descent during this war in Ukraine. And so history is repeating itself, and if you look at it just this way, it seems that the past has no impact on the future in terms of improvement. However, one thing to note is that there weren't very many articles out on this, and it's possible that this means that there is improvement and that this isn't as bad. But what is more likely is that this is a relatively new topic, so this discrimination against Russian people or people of Russian descent hasn't been addressed yet. And we'll probably see in the coming months more articles being published on this, and this becoming a bigger issue when looking back at this. However, I will say that the past has paved a way for people to address this issue more quickly. In the article that I am citing here, it showed how solutions were proposed, and they seemed pretty similar to how solutions should be imposed and worked on post 9/11 with the Muslim people. how management should work one-on-one with people and stop topics like the Ukraine war from coming up because it can make people of Russian descent feel ostracized, and to make sure to stop discrimination in the workplace. But that being said, these issues are still going on. Despite solutions being proposed, it doesn't mean that they will be used. And the past has helped us find connections between this, and I think this shows how the past can help us find solutions faster, even if they aren't being worked on right away. And but yeah, we can find connections, and connecting this to what happened post 9/11 with the Muslim people, where jobs are being denied, clients are being denied, there's harassment, they're being blamed and used as a focal point, are all very similar things. And making these connections are very important towards making a better society where we can try to stop discrimination.